As we saw last time, the Bible talks about two main types of sin. There is unintentional sin and there is intentional sin. Unintentional sin consists of those things like mistakes and character flaws and shortcomings over which we have no direct control. But intentional sin, those are the bad choices that we know are not God's choice, and we choose them anyway. If you'd like to know more about what the Bible says about unintentional and intentional sin, I encourage you to go to my website at delighting.org and look at presentation number 12, entitled, How Does a Christian Sin? My friends, there are two very important things that you and I need to know about intentional sin. The first thing that we need to know is that Christ's robe of righteousness does not cover intentional sin. And the second thing is that God promises us consistent, continual victory over intentional sin in our life. That is the miracle of God. That is the promise of God, the supernatural God dwelling in us. Only God can do that, but only you and I can let Him. I am currently sharing the Delighting in the Almighty seminar with a delightful congregation of people in Alberta, Canada. And today is Wednesday, our day off, so we headed off to Banff National Park. This is the first park in the Canadian park system consisting of almost 1.5 million acres of majestic mountains, beautiful lakes, and bubbling streams, and is chock full of animals of all kinds. It has grizzly bears, it has bighorn sheep, it has elk, wolverines, cougar. In fact, on the way here, we took some good pictures and some video of a black bear feeding by the side of the road. When we see such beauty, we are reminded of God's will for His creatures. And yet we know that we follow that will so imperfectly. And we know that there are terrible consequences for deviating from God's will, especially if that deviation is intentional. My friends, intentional sin is so tragic because Christ's robe of righteousness does not cover it. Paul tells us, for if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. Hebrews 10:26. Ellen White puts it this way: while God can be just and yet justify the sinner through the merits of Christ, no man can cover his soul with the garments of Christ's righteousness while practicing known sins or neglecting known duties. Unintentional sin is normal and even expected in the Christian life, even for the truly surrendered Christian, because these are the mistakes and character flaws and shortcomings that God is sanctifying out of us, and that is a process and it takes time. But intentional sins, my friends, is not normal. It's tragic. It separates us from God. It inhibits our faith. It inhibits our love. And the really important thing that we should know about intentional sin is that it is unnecessary. God promises us consistent victory over intentional sin in our lives. Speaking of the wonders of surrendering to Christ, therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. 1 Peter 4:1-2. Paul puts it this way: our old self was crucified with him in order that our body of sin might be done away with, so that we would no longer be slaves to sin. Romans 6:6. My friends, through the power of surrender to Jesus, and only through that power, you and I can receive consistent victory over intentional sins in our lives. God promises it. God expects it. It is His normal. God works in us both to will and to do it. And God can accomplish it. He will accomplish it. Only He can do it. But only you and I can let Him.